Hey there everybody, welcome to the next episode of my Empire of the Sun playthrough. It is the September-December 1943 turn, and the state of the board is as such. The political will track is at +5 at the moment. Things are kind of in the balance for the Japanese. This hasn't gone well the last couple of turns. Let's go ahead and take a look at their hands to give you an idea of what they're going to be working with this time around. So they got flight instructors, which is nice. Because they just don't get very many air replacements, so they're going to beef that up. Indian Ocean Raid, this one kind of stinks because it's naval only, so I doubt it'll get used, but you never know. Second operational phase, it can only be played if they're in inter-service rivalry, if they're in on the strategic agreement, so this is fine. Tojo, now this is the really interesting one, so if they play this, they reduce U.S. political will by 2. That'll bring it down to +3. That's dangerously close for the Allies to be sitting at. Because you're saying there's a couple other cards that could bring it down. Also, they're gunning for China right now. So the one thing is also to get a reshuffle, which I think is actually pretty good because there's actually some good cards in there. But this leaves open the Manchurian invasion card. So you also have to watch out for that. But this will certainly go to help their hopes of ending this game as soon as possible. So Operation Midway, not useful really, but could be. This is nice, a weather card. It's always good to have one of these. And then a China offensive. So they're pushing that box down. I'm not sure if you can play one of these and a regular offensive, and play a regular offensive with the ops, or if you can only play one regardless. I think you can do one of each, in which case they could get the box down to just 2 away from China collapse, which means that next turn they could actually, if they had another one of these cards, could have China surrender at the very beginning of 1944. Now, if they had been playing the strategy from the beginning, they probably could have it done this turn, but they also have a jungle warfare down in the future offensives queue, so just keep an eye out for that. For the Allies, they'll be going first. They have Douglas MacArthur's Pacific First Strategy. They're not inter-service rivalry, but it'll be nice in case they do get into it, which we know they won't, but they don't. Anakim operation, so could be used for Burma. It's ground only, so one of the big objectives on the ground will be New Guinea. One thing I should mention for the Japanese perspective, because South Seas HQ was knocked out, all of the ground forces in New Guinea were eliminated. So everything you see here is just air. That's it. And they all took a step loss as well. So these are just waiting for the Allies to walk into them. There's absolutely nothing stopping them from retaking the lands in New Guinea. Now, that's not a big deal because they weren't really getting anything from them anyways. It's not like they were controlling New Guinea to start with. It doesn't really matter, but they kind of hope to slow them up with some ground forces. And now they're not going to be able to get them in there as it stands. So Typhoon Task Force, Operation Stalemate, Tornado Task Force. This is a Southwest Pacific one and could break through the inter-service rivalry, but that doesn't apply. This one's going to be, I think, the opening card. Operation Sand Crab Cottage, Atu Kiska. The Japanese never went for that. Probably would have been smart too, and they still could, honestly. They still could play that and then hope to nick a point off. But obviously now the Allies have a response to it, should they decide to do that. And then Chennault for the 14th Air Offensive, which could be nice to have in the CBI. So pretty good hand, mostly military events, with the one inter-service rivalry, some balance in there as well, as they've had a pretty good mixture. And they also have Operation King 2, which they're kind of getting to that phase where they might be thinking about launching an invasion into the Philippine Islands. Now, the Japanese did shore up their defenses along the line back to Japan. They reinforced South Seas at Palau. That'll likely be the new truck and where they'll make probably another final stand at some point. But you can imagine that the Allies are going to work their way up New Guinea and then jump from Biak into either the Philippines or into Borneo. There's not a lot standing in their way, but there's enough that it could buy the Japanese enough time to figure out a strategy to get themselves out of this mess. So I'll bring you turns as they become necessary to do so. Thanks for watching. Alright, so the first card of this turn will be Tornado Task Force. It's going to be used to activate the Southwest Pacific and they're not in the Allies in strategic disagreement. They're in strategic alignment. So they're going to be activating 2 attacks down here in. This is the one I always forget. I always forget this one. Lay. Got Lay and Wewak. Going to be 2 separate attacks. It's going to be the 9th Corps attacking Lay, and the Special Forces Brigade, I think, or Division maybe, attacking Wewak. There are no ground forces in either spot, in either location, so it's just going to be an air-naval battle to decide. They didn't even have to bring in ground forces. I mean, they didn't even have to bring in air for these attacks, because if they take the base, then they have to emergency air naval move. But they thought they might as well go ahead and wrap up some of these air points while they were here. So we'll get a little bit zoomed in there. So it's going to be 4 against 20, I believe. Yep, 4 against 20. No surprise attack. No response from the Japanese. They're just going to let this happen. So it's going to be an 8 and a 3 for the air naval. On the air combat results, the 3 will be a 1/2. It's going to be modified +1 for the presence of a U.S. air, but that still brings it up only to a 4, so it's still a half. So half of 20 will be 10, which is enough to get rid of that Japanese unit. They rolled an 8, which is a 1, which regardless is not enough to damage on a 10. So this air unit will be destroyed. This will fall back into the hands of the Allies, and we'll mark that with a progress of war marker to remind me. Up to 1 now. There's not even a ground fight. And then we'll do the other here. It's going to be 4 against 28. We have the Bunker Hill and the Essex here. 28 strength points attacking just the 4. And that's going to be a 2 and a 9, which will most certainly do it for the Allies. I've almost got it under. It's a 9. So that'll be enough to get rid of this Japanese air unit, which means that they'll land safely into Wewak, no problem. And I'll mark up another one here. Put this up with 2 of the 4 for the turn, and air naval now, they'll move 1 into here. I mean the strategic redeployment, and 1 into here, just to cover those with some airfields, and the ships will go back to Bougainville, where the fleet is stationed. So pretty standard, and that's going to be a lot of what's going on here for the Allies this turn. Just going to be pretty much sweeping up some Japanese resistance, especially in New Guinea. They're not going to have a problem with progress of the war this turn. They've still got 2 easy spots here, and Ainuitak in the north, which can't wrap up the Marshall Islands. So it's just going to be a lot of taking over of Hexus and be much of a problem. On to the Japanese. Alright, back with another update, and this time I'm not bringing you a card play, I'm bringing just a regular update. So I played out the rest of the turn and debated, when I should do an update, but actually there never really was reason to do one. I'll explain how the rest of turn 7 finished out. I've already actually done the reinforcements and dealt the cards for turn 8. The U.S. ended up with a progress of war of 5. They completely retook New Guinea. So because they lost South Seas truck, of course the supply situation in New Guinea was very bad. So they didn't even actually have to fight any ground units. They just moved from Ley to Wewak to Hollandia. Eventually made their way around in Vogel Cup as well, retaking the spaces, emergency air movements, getting rid of those, the forces there. So that was not a problem. They also landed here in Java, and they're marching a Marine division, I think is the 2 X's, up to fight really the only Japanese forces in the Dutch East Indies. So that'll be going down next turn. Nothing happened in the CBI besides a little bit of repositioning, and the rest of the turn for the Japanese was spent moving forces around, shoring up defenses. The U.S. the same way, because so much of the fighting last turn was happening in this area, and now the fighting was happening here and west. They were just out of position to do pretty much anything. So they moved their forces around, moved a lot of army units in. Both sides were in strategic agreements, so that was allowed. Shifted people over, and now next turn the U.S. is really in a forward advanced position to go out and retake the Philippines, as well as the Dutch East Indies, and probably start as well in a naval invasion of French Indochina, Malaya, and do a pincer attack on Siam. So not looking good, but the Japanese continued on their plan of the China offensives. At this point, that's like their Hail Mary. They played a China offensives card and also did a China offensive, which means they won't be able to do one for the next this next turn that we're about to start, turn 8. So that marker is now down to its second to last spot here in threat to Chungking. So they're not far off from there, and the divisions in China are still at 11. They have not moved that at all. So, of course, that means there are less divisions on the board, but if they can get China out of the game and they're still haven't won, they can bring back those divisions, and that won't be a problem. So I went ahead and dealt out the hands. The Japanese couldn't play Tojo Resigns from last time. I'm pretty sure you can put a political operations card in a future offensive queue. It doesn't really make sense, but maybe there's something there. I can always check. But they couldn't play it last turn because it had to be 1944. So now they can. That'll come out this turn for sure. And it'll drop down the U.S. political will by 2, which will bring it down to 3 total. In the Japanese hand for this coming up turn, turn 8, which is January to April 1944. They've got these ground replacements, which are not going to be used at all. Patrick Hurley, which is a China offensive that'll get them down to the second to the last box, basically, which means next turn it's going to fall. I mean, it's pretty much guaranteed to fall next turn. Weather card, nice to have. Kamikaze attack, also nice to have. This probably will go unused. And then a Tokyo Express card. So they're actually down to 6, if you'll notice, because they took a hit on the strategic warfare. But otherwise, I mean, they don't have a lot of military events, but also they're not going to be doing a lot of attacking because they are very low as a whole. The U.S. hand, submarine attack, could be nice. We have 4 military events. Operation Forager, nice for the Central Pacific. And also this could be nice for an invasion of Palau, I think is where the South Seas is now, because it reduces the carrier strength. Black Day, probably not going to be used. The new China Army, which could be nice because it gives a ground replacement. But, we'll have to see how that gets used. Halsey could be nice. And then 2 ISR events, which they don't know it, but the Japanese don't have an ISR event. So, no biggie from their perspective. So, now I'm going to just combine these 2 into one video since we had such little from the last one. This will be turn 7 and turn 8, and I'll bring you turn 8 as it becomes necessary to do so. Alright, so the first card plays for the Americans on turn 8, the January to April 1944 turn. You can already see some stuff has been set up. They wanted to start off with Operation Forager to use it almost historically. Historically, it was for the Marianas invasion. This would be for Palau. I mean, it's actually a really good event card, too. Lots of activations. It also gets to reduce carriers by 2 and everything. It was just a really good card. The Japanese went ahead and sprung out and played the weather card, the monsoon, to cancel that. And what you're about to see was pretty much the original idea of what the intended target was going to be. It was going to be an initial invasion of Palau using pretty much the entire Navy in the central southeast Pacific. That's on the map. There is still forces down in Darwin and over in Java, but this is pretty much the entire Pacific fleet that still remains. The rest of it's really in the Indian Ocean. to combine and hit the rest of the Japanese Pacific Fleet, or what was left of it, in Palau. That was canceled. They still had Halsey. They're not going to get the bonus for attacking a Japanese island hex, but they get more activations, and it brought up some good and bad. They get more activations, so obviously there's more forces that are allowed in for this attack, but it's only a 2 for the activation, so they can only move 10 hexes on this attack, and the idea was to split and have some attacking Palau and the rest to pin down Shikaku, or combined fleet rather, in the Japanese islands. But it's only a 2, and they can't reach from Truk, where they were stationed, or Bougainville, where the others were stationed. So, or some of them were. So they're going to go with Halsey instead. The Japanese went ahead and responded with by bringing in the Nagato and the Yamamoto and the Taiho. So they're going to have a pretty good combined force in total. Also, they brought in this air unit from Saipan, and they decided to take a stand here simply because they do have a pretty good chance of getting something successful. So originally, without the forces from Japan, it was going to be 38 to 125 as far as the air naval goes. With the Japanese, with the forces from Japan, it ended up being 106 to 125. But they have a kamikaze attack, which is now eligible to be played because they're within 11 steps or 11 spaces of Japan, so or of Tokyo. So actually, since it's Tokyo, let me check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So yes, they do barely make it, but it is within 11. So they're going to draw a strategy card to replace that. And they're going to reduce 2 naval steps. They can't eliminate a unit, but they're going to reduce the Washington and the Massachusetts. And they'll reduce one of their own units as well, which will take this from a 8 to a 4 and reduce their own. So now the total is 109 for the U.S. to 102 for the Japanese, and that's just fine odds. So if they can get a good roll here, preferably low, if they both did a quarter, it's still going to be a lot. But, maybe they can snub the Americans' nose just enough to buy them time to get something done in China. And I should mention that in between those 2 cards, the Japanese are going to play Tojo Resigns. So it's going to be played as an event card. It's going to reduce the U.S. political will by 2, which brings it down to 3 in total. And the game marker will flip over to Tojo Resigns to the other side. And this is going to be a reshuffle for the Japanese at the end of the turn. But that was just to clear up in between. So let's go ahead and get this done. So it's going to be a straight up attack. The Japanese obviously were able to respond, and there will be some bonuses for the U.S., but none for the Japanese. Alright, so it's going to be a 3 and a 5, and let's go ahead and zoom in here on this. And I apologize for the glare. So it's going to be a 5 and a 3. The 5 will stay for the Japanese at a half. The 3 will go up by 3 for the presence of air. So it's going to actually be a 6, which will put them in the 1 category. Exactly what the Japanese did not want. If that had been just 1 lower, or if they'd have been playing a game turn earlier, they'd have been on a half as well. So their gamble isn't going to pay off exactly. So half of 102 will be 51, and half, or 1, will be 120, or 109 for the U.S. So didn't quite pay off, but let's go ahead and deal those out. So it's going to be 51 for the U.S. To have to take. So we have to can't reduce those yet. So we'll take out the Mississippi, and that'll be 12 of the 51, and North Carolina, which will be 16, and then they can do the Bunker Hill, which will leave them with only 9. So they may actually leave the Bunker Hill and maybe do the Lexington. Yeah, they'll do the Lexington and then the San Jacinto. So damage for sure, but not crippling damage. And now they're going to get 109 of their own, and this really is not good. So I'm assuming everyone's probably going to take a hit here, honestly. So we're going to do 10 for the Mogami, 10 for the Nachi, 12 for the Taiho, 14 for the Nagato, 18 for the Yamato, 10 for the 21st Air Flotilla over here. That's going to put them down to 37 still remaining. So with everyone reduced, they still have 37 to deal. And they have this unit here as well, just as a reminder. So still 37. They're going to get 1 naval replacement on turn 11 if they make it that far. And there might be a card that gives them some naval replacements. I'm probably going to go ahead and do these 2 here. That's 20 of them for these. The Mogami and the Nachi. They're going to return to the box because they are pre-war, so they can't be helped. They're also, so that's 20. That leaves them with 17. 8 of them can be the Zuiho, and that leaves them with 9. The Zuiho will also go back. And, man, leaves them with 9, which means the only thing they can hit would be this air unit or the Navy, the aircraft carrier. So they're going to go ahead and take out the 10th Air Division at 8, and that'll leave them with the following units. So obviously they're going to lose the naval battle, and so the ground combat will continue, and it's going to be 34 to 4 as far as attack goes. So they knew if they could, the U.S. knew if they could get troops, if they could get the troops on the beaches, or they could win that naval battle, that it was probably not going to be a problem getting. I don't even think it's possible to not get rid of this unit, regardless of what the rules are. But they knew if they could get boots on the ground, that they would win the ground combat. It was a matter of, they were even a bit surprised by how much the Japanese were able to muster here late. It was obviously a mistake. But 4 and 4 is the roll. And it'll be a +3 for the reaction player, so that'll actually bring it to a 7. That's all they get. And then the U.S. will have -2 because it's mixed. And they won't get anything else because they're not the only air or the only naval units. So they can't get that. But it'll be 7-2, so it's going to be 1.5, which is only 6, so useless. And then 2 is a half of the 34, sorry. So half of that 34 is going to leave them at 17, which is still enough to get rid of this naval marine unit for the Japanese, and that will go back to the box as well. So Palau will fall. South Seas will go back on the record track. Once again, they're losing it, but this time it shouldn't affect anything because there are other places. So there are other things, so it shouldn't be a big of a deal. But they'll have to emergency naval move out. I can zoom out so you can see a bit more of the dispersion of these forces. The 21st Air Flotilla will go back to Saipan, and they're much less threatening now. That'll probably be the next U.S. target. We can go ahead and put a control marker down on Palau. Advance the progress of war by 1, and just put a reminder here for me, so I remember where all of the things are. And now the thing is, these guys probably all should go back to Japan. These two definitely are going to go back to Combined Fleet. And now the others are thinking about the Philippines, are thinking about this route back to Japan, protecting those airfields, and the run up is pretty important. I think they're going to go with that over the Philippines. So they're going to station them both in Iwo Jima, because that's more important than Saipan is at the moment. And for the Americans, they're going to have to split up the fleet to some extent, and they will pretty much do it like it was. And they'll send these guys to Truk. No, they'll leave them as the advanced force with these 2 units. And then the rest will go back to Truk. Alright, so that is going to be that. And at this point, it's just not looking good for the Japanese. It's just, at this point, you're saying that the Navy is done pretty much. There is still force over in Singapore, but it's pretty much ceremonial at this point. It's a matter of whether or not they can get rid of China and shift the trend. So they're going to go ahead, and I can go ahead and get this too. They're going to play Patrick Hurley, which will move the China box 1 more down to Chungking Falls, relocate the capital. So they, just as a reminder, they can't do another China offensive this turn because they did one last turn. But next turn they'll be able to, for sure, absolutely. So that box is going to move over 1. It's a matter of whether or not the U.S. can stop it. I don't know if there's any event cards that let them move it the other direction or how it moves the other direction. I think if there's a failed offensive, maybe it could go the other way. But as this stands, it's going to go into the box on the next turn, which means that China will surrender. And if China surrenders, that is a 2 off the table. So that if they do surrender next turn, that would bring them down to 1 on the political will. So if they can hold them off and make them miss that progress of war and get China to surrender, there's still a way that the Japanese can pull off a win, but it's going to be by the absolute skin of their teeth, kind of almost like an armistice, really, if you think about it from this sense that, okay, you're not going to be able to keep your holdings that you've taken in New Guinea or the Dutch East Indies, and probably not even Siam or French Indochina, but the Japanese Empire would still be able to exist at this point. They'd probably end up losing the Marshall Islands and such, and they might even be able to hold on to their holdings in China, thinking about it historically. But that's going to be a tough ask. Maybe there's a card they get on the next turn that gets them that one. I don't know if they played Tokyo Rose yet. If they didn't, that would be amazing. But they're going to get a reshuffle. So any cards we haven't seen are going to be even harder to show up. And we're just going to get a reshuffle of the ones we already have. So who knows? It's just to go to show that it's not going to be a guaranteed U.S. victory, even though it's looking like it's a long shot for the Japanese. So it's back over to the U.S. now, and we'll see what they do. All right, welcome back for a big turn on a special occasion. I'm filming this early in the morning on January 1st, 2020. First board game or first game I'm sitting down with in the new decade. I fell in love with board games and really started the hobby in the last decade, and I'm looking to many more, continuing to play board games. So big move here, big attack coming in. So the U.S. have been holding on to this card for quite a while, and they're finally going to get to use it. It's Operation King 2, and like I said, they've had it for a few turns, but they're going to finally put it into action with two separate attacks here. It's going to be used for, it's obvious, it has to be used for the invasion of the Philippines. It's going to break into two with this attack on Samar in the south and Manila in the north. They're going to try and pick up those last 2 points that they're going to need for the progress of war. And it's going to be split up with the Southern Naval Force taking on just the 26th Air Flotilla, and then there's 2 Japanese air units in Manila. So we'll go ahead and do this southern attack because it's the smaller of the two. So it's 35 for the U.S., and it's going to be the San Jacinto, the Lexington, the Enterprise, and the North Carolina. And again, as long as with the 4th Marine Brigade against the 26th Air Division, so it's going to be 10. I have to roll really quickly for the surprise attack. It's a 3, so that means that the Japanese will be able to respond. And I debated this on whether or not they were going to bring anyone in, and they actually could from Singapore, and they have some carriers there that they could bring in, but it really at this point it's pretty much a lost cause. And to go back to what I did earlier as far as bringing the big fleet in, my reasoning behind that was, if I have 2 smaller navies, I could get picked off individually by a larger U.S. force. If I combined them together, I knew I could even the odds to pretty much within 4, 106 to 102. That's the best shot. The worst that the U.S. could roll would be a half, and of course the best for the Japanese would be a 1. So you're saying if you're doing over 100 and only taking 50, that could level the playing field in the Pacific as far as the navies go, at least for a turn or two in order to go out and win the game. So I just thought I had to do it. It didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. So now it's a bit harder to manage this. So you're saying, is the Philippines worth more than Palau was? Well, of course it's worth more. But if I didn't take the final stand there, there's no way I could take a final stand here. The forces would have been split between the two, and that navy would have been destroyed single-handedly, easily. So now I don't really have the option of defending the Philippines. So in the end, should I have tried to abandon Palau and reposition them? Yes, because South Seas HQ is useless at this point. It's not providing supply for anyone because New Guinea and everywhere is gone. So honestly, I should have moved them before, but given the place they were, that was really the only option I had. So now there really aren't any forces to bring in to defend, in my opinion. Like I said, there is the Navy in Singapore, but I'm going to try and use those to hold off some attacks on the Dutch East Indies. I don't want to lose them in the Philippines, and I don't want to bring down the forces from Japan or from the islands leading to Japan, because I think those are equally as important as the Philippines. Plus, I think there might be a way that we can possibly scrunch out an attack here. So the Japanese aren't going to bring anybody in, but it won't be surprised. Let's go ahead and get that air naval roll on. It's going to be a low roll for both sides, a 2 and a 0. The Japanese coming out worse of the 2. So the Japanese aren't going to get any bonuses, but the U.S. will get a +3. They're going to be on 5, which is 1/2. They're going to get half of 35, which I'm not even going to worry about. I'm going to go straight to the table as 18. 18 is enough to flip, not enough to destroy, and a quarter of 10 is nothing. So the air combat is a success, and they can continue on to ground combat. This card, as the bonus, says the U.S. Army does not have to be accompanied by a Marine unit to do one hex island attacks. I did not know that was a thing. I'll have to look that up. I assume I did that right in Palau because they were accompanied by a Marine unit, but I'm not sure if I've been doing that right the whole time. I think I have. I don't think I've used any Army units really at all, but This one it's okay for. So we're going to get and do this ground combat. Wow. It is a second blanking. 2 times in a row the Japanese roll a 0. This game, is already kind of tilted towards the U.S. later on just from the sheer size of the forces, but the rolls I've been doing have made it even worse for them. So the 9 will be 2. They're attacking into a mixed hex, so it's going to be -2, but they're going to get the +2 for the only people having naval units, so it's going to balance it back out to 9. They're going to do 2 hits, which is well enough to completely destroy the unit. The Japanese will get a total of 3, which is enough for 1, which won't do anything. So the second, this naval marine unit, the marine unit is gone, and Naval, sorry, it wasn't Samara was attacking, it was Naval, will fall back into the hands of the Americans. This unit will have to emergency naval move. In the north, I'll have to recalculate it. It's the Essex and the Bunker Hill. Should have had this more zoomed in for you. The Massachusetts and the Washington against 2 Japanese naval air units. They totaled 44. The U.S. does against the 27th and is that 62nd? Yeah, air flotillas for a total strength of 18. So it's going to be 44 against 18. The roll's a bit better now. 5 and 3. The Japanese will stick at 3, and the Allies will go up to 8. 8 is enough for 1 hit, and the 3 is enough for a half. So a half of 18 will not be enough to do anything, but the 1 roll of 44 is enough to do 10, 20, 30, 40, and completely wipe these 2 off the board. They are able to come back. They're not pre-war units. And now the ground combat can proceed. So it's going to be 9 of the second Japanese army taking on the American. Well, there's a lot of Roman numerals there. 24th Corps, it looks like. So it's going to be a 3 and a 7. Japanese have rolled lower on every single one so far. It's attacking into a mixed hex, but they're going to get the double pluses, 2 for the naval units, 2 for the the only air. So it is going to be a total of 9 in the end. So they're going to do 2 hits, which is enough to take out the Japanese unit, and the Japanese will have 6 for a total of 1. 9 is not enough to do anything. So this army unit will come off the map, and also Manila will fall. And I'm not sure the surrender conditions for the Philippines, but that may be enough to finish it off. And Operation King 2 will come off the board. We can do these repositions. The air flotilla is going to come over to Tarakan. The Americans, will split up the fleets. The Essex, Bunker Hill, Massachusetts, and Washington. That's a pretty good task force. Is going to sit in Manila. That'll bring the Japanese resources down to 9, I believe. No, sorry, just 10. And it's going to bump up here. They'll sit on top, and then the Lexington and San Jacinto, North Carolina, and the Enterprise are going to come back to Kwajalein, I think that is. Nope, Truk. They're going to go back to Truk. So let me just quickly check the surrender conditions for the Philippines. We don't know it off the top of my head. So for the Philippines, down here at the bottom, Manila and Davao are the only 2 they need. So the Philippines are going to come back into the hands of the Americans at the end of the turn. Highly successful attack. I thought, honestly, there could be some bad rolls in there, and the attack could stall, at least in one of these spaces. But it is not to be. So now this is the launch pad continuously for jump into Borneo, but more importantly, probably even Okinawa, because it's undefended. So that'll be a good pickup for the Americans, but now it's over to the Japanese. All right, so we carry on with the Japanese player. They went and played a card to move around some reinforcements and shore up Okinawa. They didn't want the Americans getting in there easily. So the U.S. is going to play their next card, and it's going to be Black Day. They're just going to play it for the operations points and launch an attack on Tagillajap, is what I've heard it called, but I know that's terribly wrong, so apologies. But they're going to launch this attack here. It's going to involve the New Jersey, the Franklin, and the Intrepid. It's going to be the initial air-naval battle against the Japanese, who decided to sally out the fleet from Singapore. Similar to the one earlier, it's just like, where are you going to use... Knowing when to use the Japanese Navy is really hard. When to use the American Navy is easy because it's like all the time. You can get replacement steps for it constantly, and they're not pre-war units, But when to use the Japanese Navy, I haven't quite figured out yet. But decided to do it here because I don't really know when else I'm going to use it. Also, the fleet's only using 3 ships, so this is probably going to be the smallest force I'm ever going to come across. The numbers will be 44 for the U.S. to 33. The U.S. also brought in, the Japanese also brought in the Congo, the Junyo, the Ryujo, the 28th Air Flotilla, and the 8th Air Division was already actually into Tagillajap. So the ground battle, really the U.S. aren't hoping to win this as far as the ground battle goes, because it's going to be 2 Japanese armies against a Marine division. So they're not really that counting on actually winning, but they have 2 Army Corps coming in afterwards, so this is pretty much a softening blow. And now they have the chance to eliminate some Japanese naval units, which makes it even better. So they see it as an opportunity, and the Japanese also see it as an opportunity. They're both going to play a submarine attack card. I haven't looked up to see if you're allowed to do this, play one of each side. I assume you can, but they're going to do that. The Japanese will roll on a 0 to 4, and the Americans have an even better odds. So the Japanese get a 1, and that will reduce a unit of the Japanese choice. And they're going to go with the New Jersey to reduce the most amount, and that'll remove 8 from the total count down to 36 to 33, and they'll get to draw a strategy card, so they'll have a new one. And the U.S. can hit on a 0 to 4, they eliminate 1, 5 to 7, they eliminate 2 steps. So pretty good odds they're going to get at least something. And they're going to roll a 2. So they just get to eliminate 1 step, and the Japanese get to choose, and naturally they're going to take it from the Ryujo to keep some ships alive. They'll lose 3 themselves, which will put them down to 30. So it's going to be 33 to 30. Once again, pretty similar to what we saw in the attack on Palau. The Japanese really evening up, despite being this late on in the war, evening up the count on these naval battles. So it's going to be 33 against 30. No modifiers to the dice besides the usual. And finally, the Japanese get a roll in their favor. It's going to be 9 and 2. 9 and 2. So the Japanese will stay at a 9. The Americans will have theirs bumped up to a 5, which will give them a half. A half is always a minimum the Americans can get with the bonuses that they have. So they're going to go ahead and do a half, which is going to be something like, I'll just look it up. They're going to do 17. So pretty good. They will take 17. Getting rid of the Congo would be good. They can only eliminate. No, they can get rid of these 2. So yeah, taking out these 2 aircraft carriers would be good. The Ryujo is gone, but the Junyo can come back. I can't imagine that it will, but it can. The Japanese will get to do 1 total, 30 hits, and they will take out the Intrepid and the Franklin. Hit them both 1. They have to, but they'll do that. So that's pretty good for the... Oh, actually, I have to come back. I have to bring that back because the Ryujo and the Junyo were reduced, but this one was not. So they're going to have to, for the first of their 17, take that one out. They have to, and they only leaves them 7, which they then can't do any hits with. So that actually works out incredibly for the Japanese, having that unit there. They have to, because it's not reduced. They can't reduce other units before it's reduced. That leaves them with 7 leftover hits, so they don't even get to destroy a unit. So that goes from good to great for the Japanese at that point. Pretty good turnaround for them. It would be even better if that submarine card hadn't been played. So we're going to proceed now to the ground combat. It's going to be 12 against 18. Japanese actually do have an advantage, but it's not going to be an amphibious assault, so that's good for the Americans. Japanese back to usual ways, rolling these terrible dice. It's going to be a 0. They're not going to get any bonuses, so they're going to get a half, whereas the Americans will have a 4, -2 for going into mixed, and then that is it. So there's going to be half for each. Half of the 12 will be 6, not enough. Half of the 18 will be 9, which won't be enough. So it's a stalemate there. So that's fine for the Americans. They don't really mind that too much. These units were moving in to here, so now it's going to be a lot worse next time come around. So we'll do the naval movements and zoom out here to give you perhaps a wider shot of everything's going to be. They'll move back to their landing in Sorbaja. And this naval unit, this air division will stay. No more can be stacked there. It's already full with 3. And so then everybody else will just decide to go back to Singapore. So this time, the calculated risk by the Japanese pays off pretty well. Would maybe have liked to have gotten a hit on that Marine unit, but in the end, you'll take the naval battle success. So the Japanese Navy in the Gulfs, Straits of Indonesia live to fight another day. So now it'll be over to the Japanese, who have a tricky plan up their sleeve that could win them the game. They're going to pass on their turn, though, because they have a pass banked up, I believe. They do, so they're going to pass and give it back to the Americans, who the card they just drew was the Death March. So that's actually really funny. Oh, and it won't even work. So I was going to say that it's funny that they would get this because it would counterbalance the thing the Japanese are going to do later. But they don't even control Manila. The Japanese don't, because the Americans came in. So if they'd have gotten this a little bit earlier, they would have been much better. But as it stands, it won't work. So the rest of the American hand is pretty low in ops value. So this turn will probably wrap up, and I'll bring you the final move that the Japanese are going to do to try and get that advantage they need. All right, back in the area of Java, both sides have played a few cards. The Americans are playing, or the Allies are playing New China Army for the points, trying and finish this off, and they're actually going to get a pretty good shot at doing it because they've got a surprise attack here. Actually, they roll a pretty high. The Japanese rolled pretty high, and so it's going to be surprise attack, which means they're not going to get another shot at blunting the Americans' noses, and they probably wouldn't have anyways. But regardless, it's going to be 4 against 42. Pretty simple stuff, and the Americans will roll first, so I'm sure they'll eliminate it. 3 plus that'll be 6, so yeah, that's more than enough to eliminate that unit. And now the ground combat will proceed. It's going to be 18 against 22. Roll those, and it's high numbers, which probably benefits the Americans more. A 9 and a 7. By the way, the attacking units are the Cowpens, the Baton, the Bella Wood, and Wasp, and the American corps that is attacking is the 14th, I believe. So a 9 and a 7, the Americans will go down by 2 and then up by 4 because they are the only ones with air units and naval units, so they'll be at 9 for sure. And then the Japanese will be at 7 with no pluses. They'll get 1.5. So 1.5, 18 is 27, which is enough to eliminate this core. 12, and then 24. And then they got 2, so it'll be 44 will be enough to easily take care of those 2. So I'll have to look up and see if they take the space. I'm not sure, I forget, but I know exactly where it is in the rules. So I don't think they do, but they might still get it. I think the defender wins. That's how it is in most games. But anyways, the U.S. is probably done as far as the attacking stuff goes. So successful. They're going to move the cowpens, the baton. Oh, they're going to actually leave cowpens in Bella Wood. But the baton and wasp came from Darwin. And it'll be over to the Japanese now. They got a central agreement card, so they stuck that in the future operations queue just in case. But it'll go back and forth a little bit here. Alright, so the Japanese are playing their final card of the turn, and this is what I was talking about that was up their sleeves. It is Tokyo Express Bougainville Reinforcement. So they're out of ASPs, and this is their last card. But this gives them 2 temporary ASPs, and they're going to use them to activate the 27th Japanese Army. They're going to sail them up to Atu-Kiska. Now, I didn't think about this until I saw the card in my hand, and I said, I remember through other playthrough videos of people talking about that with the Tokyo Express for supply. And I believe that'll give it supply until the end of the turn. So, it'll apply, and they'll be there at the end of the turn to get the political will. So, you're saying now it's 1 card left. That's the only thing they're going to do with this, by the way, is just, I believe they also could, let's see, I think this reaches, they're going to also, so what the Japanese did on their turn, they looked at the victory conditions and saw about the strategic bombing. So they've decided to abandon Siam and French Indochina. There's nothing there. I mean, Kuantan is the only useful space. Those places are, they're not going to get you anything, and they're vastly outnumbered. The only thing keeping the British at bay here was the fact that the Japanese Air Force was just so overpowering, and they were out of range for most of their attacking aircraft. So, that's pretty much a lost cause. So they decided to reroute their air forces to protect the islands surrounding Japan to try and keep those strategic bombers away, which, they may or may not be able to do. But it's 4 consecutive turns of strategic bombing, so you can't even miss 1 turn. You have to get it right every turn, because you get a strategic bomber on turn 9, which is next turn. So if I remember that correctly, you can't even miss 1. The other option is blockade, which is going to have to involve the Russians in Manchuria, I think, unless the Americans can land in South Korea, which they may be able to. I'll have to look that up too. But they decided to abandon that area. So that's one of the activations. They get a total of 6, actually, and they get 2 ASPs, so they can move another unit. And they're going to pick up this Japanese 29th Army, I believe. And they're going to move it using the strategic redeployment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So they can make it there, but I don't think you're allowed to do it to a location that doesn't have a port. So this island is Marcus, and it does not have a port, so I don't think it's eligible for the port-to-port movement, as you would think that would mean, since it has 2 ports even in the name. But I can look that up. Yeah, it has to be to a friendly port. And it actually doesn't take ASPs to do it if you're doing it that way. So they won't be able to make it to Marcus Island. But they have an ASP here. They can use it to get to there, and then they can use this unit to get in to Saipan. And because they have 1 additional ASP left over from the Tokyo Express card, and then they'll go ahead and do the other. This is going to be free because they're going to go port to port, and they're going to send it to maybe Miri, Balikpapan, and Tarakan. It doesn't really matter. Move it to Tarakan just because there's an air unit there. I don't think that those guys are really going to matter. Well, maybe we'll move them over to Saipan, because that's the easiest one to take out. So they'll move them to Saipan by movement, and they'll go around to stay away from any possible airfields, and then they'll also move this. They can move it to double its movement allowance, so that's 1 leg, 2 legs, 3 legs, 4 legs. They get a total of 6. They're going to slide them into Marcus Island. And now they've completely abandoned the area there. But they're going to move the political will track down. If you can see, it's already moved down another one, because when we eliminated that army, the core unit, it actually, I looked in the stuff about the political will, it goes down if you eliminate a unit. So it's going to go down to 2. This will bring it down to 1. It doesn't really matter because they're banking on China surrendering, and if that happens, it's worth 2. So it didn't really matter whether or not that happened. It's not the end of the world, or it's not any more of the end of the world than it would have been. So they're teetering at the moment. They're going to be at 1 by the end of the turn. The Americans just have a 1 ops card, and I think they're allowed to hold it. They don't really want to. They're going to use it to activate here and pick up these 2 units. These 2 army units, and port-to-port movement them to Palau to have them ready for an invasion. Alright, so that'll do it for turn 8. 7 and 8, because this has been a combined video. The Japanese will have the opportunity to play a card for a China offensive. They might get a card that gives them an event, but otherwise, I was going to say that because they could just pull all their divisions out of China, but they won't know what they get until it's been dealt to them, because you do the replacements first. So you would really be taking a huge risk there if you pulled all of your units out of China. So they're probably going to leave them in there 1 more turn, because they could possibly win it on the next turn. So, it's going to come down to, if they don't get it next turn, it's probably because the Allies have reinforced China with air units, and they just haven't had to do it. And if they don't on the next turn, then you imagine it's going to be a pretty bloody end, because the Japanese, I think, maybe have finally gotten to the point at which they can actually get something done as far as actually being defensive enough to hold on to something. So I don't think that the strategic bombing will be able to take place, because they don't have a hex with an 8, and the strategic bombing takes place on turn 9, so they would need to be able to place it and bomb on the same turn, and they're not going to be able to do that. So that will not be a possibility for a victory condition for them. They're going to have to do the blockade, or they're going to have to capture the home islands. So a tall order, but it's certainly anyone's game at this point. It's going to be really interesting to see how the next turns pan out. Thank you for watching.